Welcome to Be Super University. Today we are talking about the steadiness factor within the DISC model. And as we look at the steadiness factor, once again we're looking at the steadiness continuum, because in reality there are two sides to the steadiness factor. Most of what you'll find out there is information about the steady side of this factor. And when we talk about steadiness, we're talking about how you respond to the pace of the environment. And so we are going to be talking about steady, but we're also going to be talking about the dynamic side of this factor. My name is Jake Newman. I am an expert in behaviors and motivators, and I'm so excited you're here today because we have a lot of information to cover to learn more about this steadiness factor and how it affects you and how it relates to you, because everybody in the world lands somewhere on this continuum. As we've mentioned in the past, everybody has a piece of the pie that they land in. Some areas where we are stronger in, we have stronger tendencies, or we have more extreme tendencies the closer we are to the outside of that continuum. But other people land closer to the situational side of the continuum, and those tendencies are there, but they're just not there as often, or they're not observed as easily. So let's start out by looking at the characteristics of steadiness and dynamic. So on the steady side, we have somebody who is predictable, mild, patient, consistent, and a good listener. These people are sometimes considered the glue of the team because they are the one who they're checking in on everybody on the team individually. These people are people focused. They're not the same people focused as the influence factor, where the influence is just focusing on the people and the contacts and talking to everybody. These individuals are focused on the people individually. They are relationship based people. They don't like big crowds necessarily, unless they have a good amount of the influence factor as well. They want that one-on-one relationship, and they have tight-knit circles, and they really like consistency. So when we're talking about the steadiness factor, we're talking about pace and consistency is what we're looking at, is how they view that, how they look at that. On the dynamic side, we're looking at somebody who's flexible, eager, multitask, active, pressure-oriented. They're good under fire. Multitask, that's always a difficult one to talk about, just depending on what your view is of a multitasker. But these people can take on multiple workloads at the same time and be able to differentiate them, be able to move from one to the other without much effort. Where on the steady side, these people actually like to prefer to focus on one thing at a time because they do like that consistency. And so when they are focused on something, they don't want any disruptions. They don't want anything to get in the way. They also, with the predictability side of this behavior, is they want to know what's coming. They want to know what the future holds for them. And so when a change comes up, they need time to move into that change. A lot of one of the limitations that comes with the steady factor is that people can look at them and say, well, they don't like change. They want to stay the same. They don't want to do anything different. And that's not the full case of somebody who has a high steady factor or a strong steady factor. What it is they just need time for that adjustment. If you look at the dynamic person, they can change on the fly. You tell them something's coming, they're ready for it. They like that movement. They like to move from one to the next and keep on going. But somebody who's on the steady side of the factor, they need time to move into it. So the sooner you can give these individuals time to move into that change, the better it's going to be for them, and the less they're going to hold up the show. And that limitation of them not wanting to move will be made better because they're not really that way. They just need that extra time. If you throw something on them at the last minute, yeah, they're going to hold up their hands, and they're going to still have to move at their own pace. They're not going to, if you force them to move quicker than they can, it's just going to emotionally stress them and make them not as good of an employee they could be for you if you gave them the time they needed. So, as we've been talking about this, I want to make sure that you are thinking about, how do you fit into this factor? Where do you line up? As we've talked about these different characteristics, have any of these stuck out to you? Have any of those sounded like you? Sometimes, going back to the factors over here, and that everybody holds a piece of the pie, you're just a different amount. The dominant factor that we've talked about, the direct side of that, which is more aggressive, moves quickly because they're wanting to get things done. They want those results to happen. Sometimes individuals who have a strong dynamic factor, they get confused with somebody who has a strong direct factor. I would say probably a lot of the time they might have a strong direct factor and a strong dynamic factor. It just sometimes happens that way. But there are people who don't have that. And so there is sometimes some confusion with these people because they do move quickly and they can move on to the next project. The difference is whenever we're focusing on an individual piece of the DISC model, is we need to focus on what that factor is telling us. So the steadiness factor is telling us how you respond to pace of the environment. So they're moving quickly in their environment from one thing to the other. On the dominant side, it's how you respond to problems and challenges. So somebody who's direct, they're moving from challenge to challenge to challenge because they want to get as many of those done. They just want to keep moving towards success. So hopefully that makes a little bit more sense about how these can get confused sometimes, but the difference between them as well. Because in the past, when you look at the whole thing, we do talk about these D and I are fast-paced, C and S are slow-paced. So pace is still in the conversation with each of the factors, but you need to focus on what that factor is telling us and to really understand what that means for that individual in that situation. I like to assign superpowers to these factors because we are Be Super University. We're discovering superheroes or superpowers every day and reaching out to new superheroes every day. So if we were to assign a superpower to each of these, on the steady side, the superpower would be nature or plant, because these are the nurturers in the group. These are the people who, once again, they care about each individual and that relationship that they have. They take a lot longer time to move into that trust. They're slower paced. So when I think about plants growing, they grow. You have the little seedling that over 100 years grows into this gigantic tree. And so it's this slow growth, but it can really be a big, amazing thing. So the plant and the nature side really ties well into the steady factor. The other side, dynamic, the superpower is speed, or kind of like Flash. If you're familiar with the superhero Flash, he's just so speedy and he can be everywhere. He can do anything he needs to. He can be from one place to the next place to the next place to the next place, and that really matches really well with this dynamic factor. The other thing that comes to mind is kind of explosive, right? They're able to do a bunch of things, and they're kind of explosive, and they're eager. They want to get going. They're always active. They do well under pressure. They're not letting all the stress of everything that's happening. They can actually be okay in those situations. They might even prefer those situations. So now, as we've talked about all this, how can this information help raise your level of communication and strengthen your relationships. That's the next step I want you guys to be thinking about, because the better you can interact with these different styles, the better communication and relationship you can have with these other individuals that you're interacting with on a daily basis. We're not just talking about at work. We are talking about at work, but we're talking about in your personal life as well. How can these be helpful for you? How can this information be utilized for you? How can, in past videos, I've talked a lot about appreciation, because there's a lot of room here for steady people to be frustrated with somebody who's dynamic, and somebody who's dynamic to be frustrated with somebody who's steady. We've talked a lot about appreciating those opposite sides because of their strengths. They have the opposite strength as you. The one thing I haven't hit hard on is the actual ability to adapt. So if I was sitting over here on the steady side, I know that I'm slower paced. I know that it takes me a while to move into change. I know that I like that consistency. As I understand this more, and as I come across other people who are opposite of me, I can begin to adapt my behavior to be a little bit more towards that opposite side. It takes a lot more energy, so I'm going to be transparent about that. Whenever you're adapting, you're always going to use more energy than you would doing what you naturally are doing. However, that's what's going to build those better relationships, and that better communication is by having that ability to adapt in the situation that needs you to adapt, and being able to flow the same speed as somebody next to you, because that's where that real connection happens, and that real molding of behaviors and having that similar behavior to work together works really well. Once again, my name's Jake Newman. We work with individuals and organizations to have higher performance, build more effective communication, stronger relationships, and have a better team culture. If you're interested in doing any kind of work with me, please look at the email on the next page. I'm open to free consultations with you. We'll do a 30-minute sit down. We'll talk about what your need is and how I can help, and we can really figure out if this is a good relationship or not, or if there's something else out there that I can help refer you to. Don't forget, care to share and be somebody's hero.